This is Return to Base, a Veteran Life podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Return to Base podcast, where we talk with leaders shaping the military and veteran space, people who didn't stop serving when they took off the uniform. I'm your host, Cliff Van Rickley, and our guest today is Jim Brooks, CEO of Team Rubicon. Did I say that right?
You said it right.
Rubicon.
Here, Cliff. Well done.
Nice. So we'll just jump right into it, and I'll give you kind of an introduction that I have on my notes here. And if you want to add, feel free to. But so founded by veterans responding to the Haiti earthquake in 2010, Team Rubicon has grown into one of the nation's leading disaster response organizations, mobilizing thousands of volunteers to help communities recover from hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, wildfires, and other disasters. And about a year ago, Jim, you stepped into the CEO role, succeeding longtime leader Art De La Cruz and helping guide the organization to its next chapters. Today, we'll talk about your own military journey, what you've learned during your first year leading Team Rubicon, and how the organization prepares for disasters before they happen, and why service remains one of the most powerful ways Americans can strengthen their communities. So, Jim, welcome to the Return to Base podcast. Great to have you here.
Thanks, Cliff. Awesome to be here with you.
So I get that right. You stepped into the seat about a year ago. It's kind of a daunting task, I imagine, to go, one day you're not CEO and the next you're in charge of everything.
Very daunting task. Yeah, actually 1 year ago last week, I joined Team Rubicon as CEO, and it's probably the first time in my professional life that I've stepped into an organization that I actually didn't have a lot of relationship and connection to prior to stepping in. So daunting is an understatement. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say so. And we'll get into Team Rubicon in a little bit, but obviously we want to hear a little bit about yourself and find out kind of what led you to this life of service, right? So let's talk about your own service journey. Tell us about your military career and what first motivated you to serve.
Yeah. So actually I'll start before my military career. When I was in seventh grade, I'm the youngest of three. I went to my mom and I said, I want to go to military boarding school. And she looked at me like I was crazy and ultimately said no. But I've always had just a strong respect and interest in the military and in service. It's just that passion that drove me that direction, and probably a little bit of a need for an adventure. So I enlisted in the Navy and immediately selected to go to BUD, so basic water under demolition, SEAL training, and became a SEAL and spent 8 years in the military, operating a lot at that time down in Latin America, South America.
Interesting. Yeah. So let's go back to your horrible upbringing. What was going on at home where you were like, I need to go to a military high school middle school?
I think it's one of those things when you're the youngest. I think I was fiercely independent. I had a little more leash because I was the youngest, and not that my parents had given up on parenting, but they just gave me a little more latitude to go out and have fun. And it was just something that was, I don't know, it just resonated. I had a calling to it. So nothing was wrong with the childhood. It just was an interest that was inside me at the time.
Where'd you grow up?
Southern California.
Nice. Yeah, I'm a San Diego boy myself, but it never occurred to me to become a SEAL. So I became a Green Beret. So,
well,
yeah, strange. Well, I followed my brother into it. I was the youngest, and kind of more like he pulled me into it, probably is how he would like to describe it. But
you probably didn't like the cold water.
I definitely did not like the cold water. I still don't like the cold water. And when I think about it now, I'm like, I don't know if I would care for that surf torture. So, yeah. So what was your class number and what teams did you serve on?
Yeah. So graduated class 176 in August of 1991 and went from there straight out to Team 4 with a short stop at jump school.
Did you guys do jump school back then at Fort Benning, right?
Yeah, back then we did it at Fort Benning for just basic static climb and then advanced free fall through the team.
Yeah. And I think if I remember correctly, it's someplace out somewhere off Interstate 8 in San Diego County. I forget is it Otay Lakes or something like that?
Otay.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I have fond memories of camping in those areas. So Latin America, right? So you kind of got out before GWAT. and it's kind of an interesting time to be in the special operations community at that time. What type of lessons did you learn during your time in the SEALs that kind of, led you to continue your life of service?
I think probably the biggest lesson, in any, you'll know this, any small unit, it's just the power of the team and how, unless you truly work together as a team, you're probably not going to solve those challenges that you're working through. And if I were to say what beyond that, when you're out on that edge, I'd say it's the importance and balance between integrity, accountability, and responsibility. There's no one looking. You're out there working on the edge in gray areas, solving problems that aren't black and white. And that meant you just had to stand at a higher level and with a stronger discipline than a lot of sort of roles in life itself. So super, super powerful, something I take through to this day. I think, regardless of the type of organization, you get so much more out of humans if you just empower them and trust them to get on and do the role that they've been hired to do. And I take that right to the end today.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Something that I myself, in the leaderships post-military I've had, have kind of fell back on. Okay, these people were hired for a reason. I'm not going to do their job for them, but I'm going to hold them to a high standard. And that comes with holding yourself to a high standard too. So yeah, I could relate to that. So what year did you get out?
1998.
Okay. That was the year I joined the Army. So I'm just a little bit behind you, right?
We're just passing.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You ever, maybe you've been asked this before, but you ever kind of look back and think, oh man, if I only stuck it around a couple years longer, I would have been able to, go off to the Middle East and do some of the things that those teams end up doing?
Yeah. I mean, I stayed in the government, so doing other things. I think, in life, I tend to have a rule, no look backs. You just got to keep looking forward and figure out where you're going and, what's your mission today. So it's an interesting thought, and you can go down a rabbit hole with the what ifs, I think.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think that's a good philosophy. I sometimes I tend to, a lot of my peers stayed in, and I kind of saw where they ascended to. And it's not like I have professional jealousy because I've had a great life since leaving the military, but certainly it's kind of a what if, but I digress. No sense doing it. I haven't jumped out of a single airplane since I stopped being paid to do it. Right. And people ask that a lot. They're like, how do you get that thrill? And I'm like, I don't know. I have 2 kids and a wife, 2 dogs in the house. My thrill is like providing for them. So
just different. It comes in a different guy.
Yeah. I'm lying a little bit though. I do kind of miss it sometimes. So what other, outside of the government, between Team Rubicon and the SEALs, what other positions did you have that kind of led you in the pipeline to your current role?
Yeah. So when I left the government, I first went into consulting and kind of stayed in that same space, complex geopolitical issues, security, operating issues around the world, worked a lot in the war zones. And, so it was that same sort of skill set that was required. You're working at the edge, you're solving things that there isn't a off the shelf solution for. You're working, cultural relationships, and just grew through that space. And so from a role perspective, I started as a consultant and then grew up in that space, ultimately running a practice around crisis and security management, and then going from there and becoming the CEO of a region for that firm, and then ultimately global chief operating officer. And then after that, I co-founded a AI technology company in the same space again. So geopolitical and operating risk around the world, sort of bringing that into geospatial environments and helping people understand what's happening in hyper local ways around the world.
Wow. Yeah, that's all pretty interesting. Actually, we probably talk about that for a couple hours, but that's obviously not what we're here to do. But moving on to Team Rubicon and your kind of next chapter, your current chapter in life, right? So about a year ago, you stepped into the CEO role at Team Rubicon, succeeding Art Dela Cruz. And for listeners who may be familiar with Team Rubicon, but not with your leadership journey, what attracted you to the organization and what made this the right opportunity at this point in your career?
Yeah, so it was January 2025, and I had a couple things going on. One, I was getting ready to exit my former company, and two, my mom's home burnt down in the Altadena wildfires in California. And so I was supporting my mom in this incident. I saw Team Rubicon around the neighborhood, and I literally shortly thereafter reached out to Art Dela Cruz, who you just mentioned. I said, "Hey, I'd love to learn more." And he was also working on his transition. And about 6 months later, we swapped positions. He went out and I came in. And it was, it was seeing them in action. I had always had this calling to return to service in some way. I thought that would be returning into a government appointee role in some way. But seeing Team Rubicon, what I'd say was a very familiar culture, incredible humor, that irreverence to do anything just to get the mission done. It seemed like a very natural home and a way to serve. That was a different way than I had thought I was going to go. And it just was the right time and right place to step in.
Yeah, it's amazing how sometimes we get put in the right place at the right time, right?
Yeah.
I mean, out of tragedy, right?
It was I'd like to say that there was some grand scheme and deliberate plan, but it wasn't. It just was the confluence of events in my life at that time, and it all just came together.
After years in the Army, I got pretty used to moving, but sometimes you land somewhere that feels like home. For my family, that's exactly what happened. If you're looking to put down roots of your own, Navy Federal Credit Union's Home Buyer's Choice Loan offers down payment options as low as 0% with no required private mortgage insurance. Navy Federal Credit Union, our members are the mission. Navy Federal is federally insured by NCUA Equal Housing Lender. Terms and conditions apply. Loan subject to approval and eligibility requirements. Learn more at NavyFederal.org/zerodown. So you had about a 6-month period where I'm sure you learned a lot more about Team Rubicon, and maybe you saw how things were operating. I'm sure you had a lot of conversations with Art. When you're coming into a role like that, do you know, there's I think when you ascend to a certain position, whether it's team chief or team sergeant in special forces, you guys see how the former guy did it, and maybe you think, oh, that's great. I might have done things a little bit differently. How did you bridge that gap, or what was your philosophy going into it? Because I'm sure it wasn't just, I'm going to come in and it's going to be exactly the same. You had a vision, I'm sure. What was that like?
Great question. So in that first 6 months before I even joined, I talked to 40 people between employees and the executive team and board members, and just a lot of conversation. And what really stood out for me over that period of time is just how consistent and unscripted every single one of the conversations were. People were authentic. They were having real conversation, told the same story, but in different ways, their own ways. It was real. And I think most of the time when you're having conversations with a lot of people, you're going to hear a lot of different things and you're going to try and fill in the gap. This was just really consistent. So it gave me a lot of confidence that it was real, that everything that, it just wasn't marketing veneer and a website. There was something real and something special behind the scenes. And then I spent a lot of time with Jake Wood, the founder, and with Art and a variety of other members of the team, just getting behind the scenes. And what really, and just frankly listening and being curious and asking questions. And I love the first 6 months when you can ask dumb questions and get away with it. It was fantastic. But what struck me about Team Rubicon is, in most organizations, I think you step in and everyone bigs it up and tells you how awesome the place is. And you step in and it may be awesome, but it's probably not as big as they bigged it up to be. Team Rubicon is 10 times as special as I thought prior to stepping in the door. The people everywhere are just crazy passionate for what we do. Our volunteer base, our gray shirts who actually affect the services and do the work, they are so committed to creating outsized outcomes for the people we serve. It's just a humanness that I really haven't experienced in my life. And those who support us, our donors, are incredibly generous. And I say frequently, I've spent a lot of time in the commercial world, and there's no knife fight in Team Rubicon. Everyone leans in and says, what else can we do to help other people who we don't even know and have a real meaningful impact on the next day of their life? And it's been an amazing experience. But I think the crux of your question was, how do you get your head around it? It was a lot of conversations, a lot of listening, because I'm learning a ton of things that I've never done before. I'm learning to lead volunteers, people who have a choice whether they wake up and come to work that day or not. Working with donors who, really fuel our mission and allow us to do what we do out of pure generosity. And frankly, working with survivors and communities to gain their trust and credibility to let us in to do something at times when they're incredibly fragile or vulnerable. And so it just takes that willingness and curiosity to listen, to learn, and no different than, what you might have experienced stepping into, a foreign environment and building those bridges and relationships so you could do the good work.
Yeah. And I think you touched on something important there too, is a CEO has a great deal of responsibility. And this is quite a bit different because you have number one, you have a fiduciary responsibility to your donors to do the right thing with what they've given. But, it's not maybe far off from your responsibility to shareholders, I suppose, but in a different way, right? So Team Rubicon earned a reputation, for instance, as being an organization that goes out and takes the fight to the problem, I suppose. But what have you learned since in that role? As you had shareholders before, now you have donors, you have people who are really depending on you for what you said is what happens tomorrow.
Yeah. I think probably the most powerful thing I've learned is that humans are just amazing and powerful in every way. And the amount of people who just want to go out and do good, from volunteers who give up their time away from family, their jobs, their personal matters, donors and their incredible generosity to help a cause that is critically important and under-resourced. It's probably the biggest learning of the power of humanity if we just let it get out there and do good for a living. So those are probably the biggest things. I constantly step back and say, how do we do more and have greater outcomes for our survivors and the communities that we serve? How do we continue to attract and upskill and deploy, a volunteer army? We have 200,000 gray shirts. In 2025, we deployed about 50,000 of them for a week or more. So big, complex logistics to make that happen. And how, to your comment on equating donors to shareholders, how do we steward them? How do we make sure that everything they entrust us with is going straight to the mission in a responsible way, and make sure that we're creating the outcomes that they're passionate about and that they're gifting us for? They're investing in our mission ultimately.
Yeah. And I think we could take a little bit of a step back and just talk about kind of the nexus of quickly about Team Rubicon. So it grew out of disaster, veteran operated, founded. Can you talk a little bit about that and kind of cap it off with what the mission is of Team Rubicon?
Yeah. So, 2010, January, an earthquake hits Haiti. Up 250,000 people are killed in that earthquake. And Jake Wood, the founder of Team Rubicon, waiting to go to business school, said, shoot, I need to go do something about this. And he tried to volunteer for a few organizations. It didn't work out. And so he found a couple friends, jumped on a plane, and they flew into the Dominican Republic as an access point to get into Haiti. And they went there and did good for a couple months. And when they came out, he said, well, let's forget business school. Let's just build Team Rubicon. Let's do this. And that was the beginning of Team Rubicon. How do we take veterans and use their skill set that they learned operating in complex environments, austere environments, lowly supportive environments, and go out and create, incredible outcomes in communities that we serve? And that was the beginning of Team Rubicon. Fast forward 16 years later, and that culture, that mindset, that operating at the edge, that bias towards action, that willingness to go out there still exists. The veteran ethos and our veteran community still drives everything that we do. It's how we operate, but it's really created a true army for good. We can respond to any disaster anywhere. The bulk of what we respond to is across the US, but we'll go anywhere where we can make a difference. And it's over the years had a pretty amazing impact. We've had about 1,500 operations in the last 16 years. So quite a bit.
Wow, that's incredible. Coming back to the military is you train for maybe 18 months to go on a 6-month trip. So imagine the amount of resources and time spent preparing for the unknown is weighty and something that I'm sure you spend the majority of your time doing fundraising and preparation and stockpiling, et cetera. Can you talk a little bit about that and then kind of lead into something really unique, I think, which is HUREX, which I think is kind of a really interesting, very, very kind of military-esque way to handle readiness.
We've got to be ready to respond to a disaster at a moment's notice wherever it hits. But as you said, we don't know, most of the time, we don't know when it's going to strike. Maybe with some weather events, we'll get a little foresight and we can mobilize. But outside of the actual responsive side, we are constantly building capacity. So training, upskilling, rehearsing, making sure our kit and equipment are all fit for purpose, making sure our process and how we execute is going to happen. So they're working every day somewhere, and it's either building capacity, increasing resilience in a local community, responding to the immediate aftermath of a disaster, or supporting the long-term recovery of that disaster zone itself. And you mentioned HUREX. So HUREX is our annual hurricane exercise. And as you said, just like a military exercise, this is a tabletop, but with a real life scenario. And so this year in June, we brought about 70 members of our team down to our operations center in Dallas. And we spent a week working through a very complex dual jurisdiction scenario. And this is all to help us with that preparation and evaluation, work on our coordination, how our teams interoperate. If you think of the complexity from mobilizing volunteers, logistically getting the kit and equipment, doing the liaison and relationship management with governmental and non-governmental authorities, and putting everything together. It's sort of that traditional mission planning process. And so the whole intent of HUREX is to increase our capacity and ability to plan, deploy, and sustain operations when a real disaster happens.
What did you learn about where Team Rubicon is, where it excels, and more importantly, where it can improve?
First, I'd just say that it's amazing to see such a complex operation distilled into very organized chaos. Everyone has a role and a responsibility, and they're working that section, that space for the entire week. So whether you're working on the fundraising side to make sure we have the resources to deploy, you're working on flights and hotel and lodging, you're working on finding the volunteers, building the communications kit and equipment, whatever that is, it all comes together in that room. And I think the first thing that, probably stands at all of this is working the process, letting the process work out and knowing when to deviate because you have to at times. The importance of communication and making sure everyone stays together on a common picture versus in silos, because those silos create such inefficiencies, and focusing on constantly shrinking any gap in that communication change. And then this year we did something unique. We brought in a couple of our outside partners who also work in the disaster zone to work on not just Team Rubicon's response, but within the ecosystem of response providers, how are we interoperating and working alongside them? And that was hugely powerful because this is all about making sure we create the best outcomes. And that takes a community much larger than any one organization.
Yeah, certainly. And if you don't mind, I'd like to just quickly ask if in the last year you have a story that connected with you closely that kind of drives home the importance of your role.
Yeah, I mean, my first week, so I joined Team Rubicon on July 14th, 2025, and went to the office, got a plane ticket and my computer, and immediately flew to San Antonio, Texas, where we were responding to the floods that swept through Kerr County. And they happen to be going through there again right now. But last year, there was quite a bit of loss of life. So the immediacy and importance of our response there was weighted in something that is fairly unique. There's in a lot of disasters, there's not a big loss of life. Just being out there on that team and seeing survivors who came around, their confusion, the chaos, they're completely lost in the moment when they've lost everything in that disaster. And where it really connects is when they come up and they see you and you see those first steps of, we bring hope. We bring that opportunity for them to say, there is a way out from this. These are the first steps. And I see how this world will actually come and support us as we take these first steps into whatever is next in life. And that really connected it to me in my first week on the job, was just seeing the impact on how those little things that we do have really big outcomes in people's lives. And, I take that to just now, we put medical teams into Venezuela after the earthquake 2 weeks ago now, maybe about 3 weeks ago. And the ability of doctors and medics and paramedics to very quickly step out of their day jobs and give their time to jump on a plane to a foreign land. And again, see people who, because of our circumstance, an earthquake in this case, did not have the access to medical treatment and resources that they needed. Just, you can feel the impact is palpable. It's just very tangible. You can see the outcomes. You can see the change in people's lives.
One thing about military life is you get used to moving. New duty stations, new houses, new towns. Most places are just another stop along the way. Every once in a while, you end up somewhere and think, you know what? I could see myself staying here. That's what happened to my family. The challenge today is that putting down roots isn't as easy as it used to be. Home prices are high, inventory's tight. Buying a home can feel overwhelming. That's why Navy Federal Credit Union's Home Buyer's Choice loan caught my attention. It offers down payment options as low as 0% with no required private mortgage insurance. Plus, you can get up to $9,000 cash back to help cover closing costs through Realty Plus. Look for your sign at NavyFederal.org. Navy Federal Credit Union. Our members are the mission. Navy Federal is federally insured by NCUA Equal Housing Lender. Terms and conditions apply. Loan subject to approval and eligibility requirements. Learn more at NavyFederal.org/zerodown. Benefits vary by transaction and location. No Navy Federal financing required. Terms, restrictions, and conditions apply. Visit NavyFederalRealtyPlus.com.
For one thing, obviously domestically, you guys do a lot of response, and the international piece is I think, it's not unique to Americans for sure, right? But what's the kind of reaction of folks in foreign countries when they realize, oh, this isn't the American government. This is just American citizens who are leading the charge in certain aspects with the response. What's that like?
You realize that in our line of work, responding to disasters and just helping humans, there are no politics. It doesn't matter what you believe, what you're doing. How do we go in on those true humanitarian principles? And neighbors helping neighbors, people helping people. And people are grateful, regardless of whether you share the same belief structure, regardless of your experience. People are grateful to help and to be helped. It's a very human thing. And so it's probably one of the most rewarding parts of this is there are no politics. Everyone's joining for the same reason. If there's trust and credibility with the communities that you're serving, you're welcomed in.
So there's a very veteran focus really with Team Rubicon, and kind of tell me what is the differentiating factor that an organization that has so many veterans in it, what does that bring to the table?
Yeah. I mean, let me tell you why, the veteran is such a perfect fit for Team Rubicon. When they step in to work in a disaster response, it's just super familiar territory to them. It's not that we're working in a war zone, but we're working in ambiguous environments where there's complexity. They bring that sort of grit, that just DNA that's really successful working in those types of environment. But then I go back to the purpose is clear. They know what they're there to do. So veterans just have this clarity of purpose, and mission helps them achieve outsized impact. They do good things when they know that. And so Team Rubicon creates that for them. We organize, we put them on a disaster. They know what their role is. And it just is sort of that secret DNA that kind of really makes Team Rubicon special in how we respond. There's a lot of orgs that support the recovery in the aftermath of a disaster, and they're all doing amazing work. But I think we do it in a special way. And that experience is an experience that is pretty unforgettable when you join us in this mission.
Yeah. Do you find also that a lot of veterans, they get out of the military and they have a trouble finding purpose? And do you feel like that's kind of almost like not the main mission, but something that is certainly impactful?
Yeah. You'll know this, but when you get out of the military, you've been doing something that's just very mission centric. It's very clear, and there's no other priorities. That is what you do. And sometimes that can be lost in the private sector or commercial world. You just you're doing what you do because it's necessary for life, but you don't necessarily have that same passion. Team Rubicon does something. It immediately gives you that clarity. Our mission is clear. We respond to disasters, super clear. It gives them a community that they're familiar with a culture that they're familiar with, the humor, the storytelling, the tribal nature of it. It just all comes together very clear. And it gives them a space where they can create the community, but they can also feel comfortable to share aspects of their lives with their brothers and sisters that perhaps don't have that same comfort in their normal day job itself. So there's sort of a dual mission. Our primary mission is serving the disaster survivors, but that second mission is that creating that community amongst our veterans and everyone who serves at Team Rubicon so that they can be their whole selves, and all sorts of magic comes out in that.
Yeah, well said. And, there's something about being tired and dirty that you don't normally get in the civilian sector, right?
There's a surprising amount of joy that comes from being very dirty, very sore, and very tired. That doesn't cause you to want to go to bed, but causes you to want to relax and unwind and spend time with your fellow gray shirts.
I did want to touch on, our 250th birthday as Americans just passed. And I know that you guys are involved in America 250. Can you touch on that and why you felt it important to be a part of that?
Yeah. Well, our 250th birthday, pretty important year. I think when we look at, the U.S. was born on this idea that we, the people, this kind of bold concept. So Team Rubicon's working on, we the bold, and it's this whole service concept to how we show up together, neighbor to neighbor, helping communities that we serve. And for the 250 side of it, we want to volunteer 250,000 hours. So that's hours that we put into responding to disasters, impact 250,000 people with wildfire mitigation. So we're rolling out a large mitigation effort, given how prevalent wildfires are today, to reduce the consequence and reduce the impact of those. So hopefully supporting a population of 250,000, and to bring in and to train 2,500 new volunteers into our ranks. And we've got to constantly build capacity to make sure we can respond anywhere at any time. And so continuing the lifeblood of our Glacier community is fundamentally important to our success.
Oh, yeah, and I appreciate that. I mean, those are some daunting goals. So, I'm sure folks, when they heard those goals, they're like, wow, this CEO has some plans, right? Not that you came up with them yourself, I'm sure, but with a great team. But I'm so glad you guys are out there doing things and putting people who care where nearby people who need to be cared for. So, just a quick segue into what's the future of Team Rubicon? What's that look like? You described a little bit about what your goals are for the year, but just want to know, what's going to be different in the next year other than that?
Yeah. I mean, our whole goal is to make sure that we have the capacity and capability to respond to any disaster that comes. So it's constantly training and equipping us so we're stronger in the face of a disaster, continuing to scale our organization appropriately so we can field the right people with the right training to the right location at the right time, staying really true, leaning into our mission itself, but serving the whole disaster ecosystem. So balancing what we do in our response work with what we do and our resilience building side left of the disaster. How do we reduce the consequence and impact of any event and making sure we're always ready? But I think if I stand back and say, if we had one goal, it's never to say no. When there is a need that we can solve, that we can always be there. So not to be constrained by capacity, whether that's humans who are volunteering, the tools to do the work, or the financial resources to make it happen.
Yeah, and we all appreciate that, and hopefully, to those listening out there, they won't need any of your help. But let's say they want to get involved. What are some of the ways? Like, where can we find information, and what are some of the impactful ways that somebody who, let's say they can't volunteer to go out and do the good work, but what are some things that folks like me can do to support the work you all do?
Yeah, I'd say the easiest thing to do is go to teamrubiconusa.org, and you can donate if you want to financially support us, or you can volunteer. And volunteer, you just click on the link, fill out some information, and then it's your choice how you get involved. You can, if you have the time, you can go for week deployments down to a disaster zone, but we have hundreds of opportunities to support us behind the scenes in time that you have, whether that's 1 hour or 1 day or something more. And we also run a couple thousand service projects every year. So those are scheduled in advance and things that you can work into your schedule. So we recognize that not everyone has the same time and flexibility. And so we create a lot of different opportunities that can make sure that we're always prepared to respond when the world needs us.
I appreciate your time today, Jim. And, I think listeners are going to really enjoy learning about Team Rubicon and hopefully find it in their heart to go out and support as a volunteer.
I'd love to see you out here in Gray.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So yeah, to our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, all that. But more importantly, go out to teamrubiconusa.org. Is that right?
That's correct.
And check out what they got going on and help where you can. And until then, we'll be all looking out for each other, just like Team Rubicon's looking out for you, even if you don't know it. Even if you don't know you need it yet, you may very well need it.